Welcome, one and all. This is the Public Square from the American Policy Roundtable. I'm Wayne Shepherd, and we've got Dave Zanotti here. Surprise, surprise. Along with the team, Alan C. Duncan, our producer, Dr. Jeff Sanders at the table, Melanie Elsey, and Rob Walgate. And we're talking about giants and grasshoppers today. Now, that's an intriguing title.
Giants and grasshoppers, yes. Kind of a cool flannel graph sort of Sunday school title for the broadcast today.
Wow, now you're dating yourself.
Yeah. What is a flannel graph? Yes. Now, I was not raised in a Protestant church, and so I didn't know what flannel graphs were, so I had to learn them.
Yeah.
I learned them as putting together a vacation Bible school program when I was in training at a congregation when I was in theological seminary. So I had to go and do remedial flannel graph work. It's like 090 courses.
I remember cutting out Moses and Joshua and Caleb.
They're still being used, and you cannot replace them. They are still wonderful.
So
okay.
I was at a congregation recently, and I heard a message, Wayne, on the life of Caleb. And a little bit about Joshua, but mostly with the story of Caleb from the Old Testament. And I was so taken by the message that I wanted it to keep going. And it was a pretty short format opportunity for the minister, who was a guest pastor, to come in and speak. He had a compelling message. And what I did was I took notes, but then I came home and I made application. And my wife and I talked about it for several hours. And we said, this should be a radio show. So with all due credit to the fact that I didn't start the conversation, it happened at a church in Orlando with a Canadian pastor who was actually doing the talk. And I'm not going to get into all the names because I don't want them to have to suffer if I mess it up. But the story was about Caleb, and I thought, okay, this is a powerful story. So I wanted to bring it to conversation today for a number of reasons. One, the scripture says, "Man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeds from the mouth of God." And if that's true, and I personally believe it is, but I recognize we have new listeners who are with us every single week who come into this program, some thinking that they're here by accident, others that are casual, some that are critic, and all are welcome. The idea that man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeds from the mouth of God is not exactly the sort of statement that we embrace heartily in the United States today in Western culture. Because if that statement is true, then we're all starving. And you look at some of the maladies in our culture, and they really are the reactions of people who are starving to death, starving for meaning, starving for purpose, starving for life. It's remarkable to me that we have a culture which is built upon autonomy and has been for the last 60, 70 years, 100 years in this country. And that yet our goal was to become completely autonomous of any external or transcendent authority and be our own people, have it your way. We're going to do our own thing. And the net result of it has been that it doesn't matter whether you're talking from the perspective of the late Dr. Billy Graham, or you're talking from the late Dr. Carl Menninger, or you're talking from any set of psychological consultants and studies and experts today. Our autonomy has made us the loneliest people in the history of this country. And we don't even connect those dots. Well, similarly, without a transcendent ethic, without a conversation of mind that is bigger than our own, we starve to death mentally. We kind of are by ourselves, and we don't have a lot of answers. So anytime we have the opportunity here on the Public Square to bring a conversation that is anchored in the bread of life, anchored in the Word of God, anchored in the Scriptures, we'd like to take advantage of that opportunity. And hopefully, even if a person doesn't understand all the pieces and parts that we're talking about, maybe, just maybe, they'll taste and consider that there's something here that feels right. Mm-hmm. So that's why we do this.
You're talking about kind of the forgotten man, Caleb, right?
Yeah, Caleb. What an interesting character. So let's go to a place called Kadesh Barnea and start our conversation. It kind of sounds kind of cool. Almost sounds like it could be something out of Star Wars. It doesn't. Yeah. So Kadesh Barnea. Jeff, Melanie, cut the flannel graphs out for us and put them on the board, would you?
Well, so Moses and the Israelites were on the verge of going into the promised land. And so Moses, being the smart guy he was and the wise leader, he sent spies into the land. He sent 12 spies to go into the land of Canaan. And he says in Numbers chapter 13 and 14 is where the story is. And he says, go up and find out if they're strong or weak, few or many, whether the land they dwell in is good or bad, and so forth and so forth. And, it's what spies do. And so they go into the land and they take a look at things, and they cut down a cluster of grapes that it takes 2 men to carry between them. It's such a big cluster. And they come back, and 10 of the 12 spies say, oh, we can't do this. Yeah, it's a great land, and it's flowing with milk and honey, and it's wonderful, and it's like paradise. But the people who dwell in the land are strong, the cities are fortified and very large, and moreover, we saw the descendants of Anak there, the Anakim, and they are giants. They're giants in the land. And then 2 of the 12, Caleb and Joshua, said, nah, we can take it. The spies, 10 of the spies who don't have any faith, they're saying, oh, they're giants, and they are the descendants of the Nephilim, which is a strange word from Genesis chapter 6, and there's a whole bunch of controversy about that. But Joshua and Caleb do not confirm that. They don't say, yeah, they're the Nephilim. Oh, no, they're too big for us. They just say, nah, we can take it. We can take those
They
guys.
don't say they're not the Nephilim. They just say we can still take them, no matter what.
They don't confirm it. They just say, nah, we can go get them.
I think in other passages they may confirm it. But,
Okay. All right.
But Jeff, we have to get to the backstory before they even went into Canaan to look. It wasn't Moses' idea to send spies. It was God commanding him at the beginning of Numbers 13. And this might be the cornerstone to the whole story, because God said to Moses, send some men to explore the land of Canaan, which I am giving to the Israelites. Mm-hmm. And then he instructed Moses to take the leader from each of the 12 tribes. Caleb was one of those leaders. Joshua was one of those leaders. Behind the move to go in and explore and to take a peek, and they were sort of surreptitiously going in and looking to see, if the land was good, what the people were like, what their personalities were like, if they were strong, if they were weak. It was kind of reconnaissance. They were going to go and then report back so that Moses would know what they were dealing with.
They were doing intel.
That's exactly what they were doing.
Let's roll tape back just a little bit prior now. Because this story can get a little bit confusing because it has sort of a rewind on it. These are the people who came through the Passover. These were the Israeli slaves of Egypt, whom God brought out of the land through Moses and the 10 plagues and the Passover. And these are the folks who lived through the Passover, who saw that miraculous deliverance, came out with boatloads of stuff that the Egyptians were literally throwing at them to say, get out of here, please, take my jewels, take my bike, take everything, just go. They got out, they crossed the Red Sea, and then Pharaoh comes. First off, the Red Sea parts, right? I mean, this is not like, this really happened.
Yeah, they did not catch a
miracle,
marsh at low
miracle
tide.
in real time. It was
the real thing.
Yeah. It really happened, and there they go, and they're out there walking on dry land. Okay, that's the part of the thing that when I read that, it's like I had seen the whole movie thing as a kid, and I thought, okay, but then when I read the Bible,
it's a little different.
Then I realized that they walked across on dry land.
Yep.
Okay, so all right, so now they get across, and they're on their way out, right? That they're past the halfway mark, and here comes Pharaoh and all the armies. Okay, and like now the people are freaking. Of course, I'd be freaking out. I'd be screaming. I mean, this is like such a Billy Crystal movie moment to me, because everything is colliding, and the Jewish humor is leaping out of this process. All right, so they're running now, fleeing for their lives. They're getting and they turn, and God closes the seas upon Pharaoh and his armies. These people saw this with their very eyes. They were delivered and delivered and delivered again. Now they come up to the doorway, the portal to the promised land that they came out to receive from God. This is the God that they went up on the mountain with, right? God gave them the 10 Commandments. I mean, all of this stuff happens to these people. They see the glory of God, but they're knocking on the door the first time at Kadesh Barnea. They're knocking on the door to go in. Now, the records show that what are there? About 11 days to get from where they left Egypt to get to the gateway at Kadesh Barnea?
That's the short route. They took the long route, sure.
Yeah, but they could have gone in at 11 days, right? So they get a knock on the door to go in, and Jeff, then they send the spies, right?
Correct.
Okay. So they've been 11 days past the miracles. They're at the door. The spies are there. I'm ready to go. We're all ready to go. And the spies come back and say, nah, I don't think so.
We're going to pick up the story there on the Public Square today. You know the story. Do you know the application? We'll talk about that next on the Public Square as you stay with us. Back with you on the Public Square today. Giants and Grasshoppers. We're talking about Caleb, that Old Testament figure that we know the flannel graph story, as Dave said. I'm sure I'm jumping ahead on what you want to talk about, Dave, but you think about the 10 that came back with a negative report and the 2 that got it right. Leadership is not always by majority, is it? We can talk about that later, though.
Oh, no, we could start right here, Wayne, because applications are what this program's all about.
Okay.
I mean, these folks were 11 days from the most amazing miracles that have ever been seen on the planet since creation and since the flood. And they all saw them as a nation. They said, and God says, send the spies in. So they sent in the spies to bring back the reconnaissance. And 10 of those people who were carefully selected took a look at the size of the job, and they forgot who they were working for.
Yeah.
They forgot. It canceled it out. And then the power of what those 10 people ended up doing to negate real leadership, the poison, and what they had to say. I mean, Jeff, you quoted earlier the passage of the scripture that they used. They basically said, yeah, we were there, and yeah, they got the 2 guys with the sticks and the grapes and all that stuff, and they've got it's milk and honey, and it's like, in fact, Israel. I sent an article around from a Jewish publication. Do you know that in the 50s, the nation of Israel published a postage stamp, and it had that depiction, an artist's depiction of the guys carrying the grapes, like on the stakes, because it took 2 people to carry the grapes. There was a stamp in the nation of Israel in the 1950s.
Nice.
This was a big deal. This was a really big deal. And so they had the chance to go in, and it was a test, if you would. And 10 people failed the test, but those 10 people then influenced the vast majority of the people to say, this is too tough for us.
Yeah.
As Wayne mentioned, these are great applications, though, when it comes to leadership to talk to our children about. I feel like that's one of the most difficult things in raising a child is having them understand when you lead, it can be lonely, and you may not always have agreement from everyone that's around you.
Well, Rob mentions children. This story is special to me because I have a son. My youngest son is named Caleb, in part because of this biblical figure.
Is that right?
And so I tell him this story, and I've read him this story. I need to do it again. He's only 10, so sometimes I realize how much kids forget. I mean, I forget a ton, but you do the same things with your kids when they're 5, and then you ask them in 3 years if they remember them. They're like, I have no recollection of that happening. So, so I'm going to read the story to him. I was talking to him this morning as I was reading through this. I was like, hey, I'm reading about Caleb from the Bible. Yeah.
Very
And
cool.
he
Very
likes that he
cool.
was such a strong warrior and so brave in faith, as Melanie would say.
I was just reading a history book about 1940 on the verge of World War II, and when it came time for the U.S. to consider sending the Allies support, military support, every general, including Marshall, on FDR's staff opposed it. And FDR overrode all of them.
Did Marshall say, there's no way we can do it? Is that what he was thinking?
They were saying that we need the resources ourselves to protect ourselves.
Yeah.
Wow. Leadership matters. In leadership is an art, and I contend it's the loneliest art. And certainly Joshua and Caleb were very lonely because, but they tried. And what happened was the 10, look at where their eyes were. Their eyes were on the obstacles. Joshua and Caleb come back and saying, wait a minute, our eyes are on the promise. Our eyes are on the God who got us out of all of these other circumstances. This kind of looks like small stuff to us compared to what we've been through. But the other guys, it looked like big stuff. And the idea was it was the giants. The giants were the thing that got them. They said, this land is so difficult that it literally eats the inhabitants of it. Wow. The land will eat you alive. And if the land doesn't eat you, the giants will.
Hyperbole much? I mean, that's the words that they use, the unbelievers used. And when you're in a panic, they use all this inflated language. Oh, they're going to eat us alive, and there are these giants, and they're so,
like Jack and the Beanstalk, fee, fi, fo, fum, here they come, we better run.
I don't think that they were 10 feet tall. I mean, I'm 5'7", and anybody 6 feet tall is a giant to me. Rob is a giant in the room here.
Wait till RJ walks in.
Yeah, no, but he's definitely an Anakim. Now, were they, 7 feet tall? Yeah, probably. I don't doubt that. There are people today who are that tall, but they weren't insurmountable.
Well, and this gets to the part of the controversy about this passage is who were these people? And some believe, many church fathers, Clement, Tertullian, Irenaeus, Justin Martyr, they all believed that the Nephilim were descendants of fallen angels. And there are some references in Jude and 2 Peter that seem to intimate this. So if that framework is on this, then these people are facing not only a physical battle, but they're like this. I'm facing demon spawn. Like these people are literally the descendants of fallen angels in their minds. Mm-hmm. And so now it's a physical battle, but it's also a spiritual battle as well. That just raises the stakes for some of these folks. But for those that have the faith to fight it, they actually maybe want to fight the spiritual battle even more.
Might we remember that historically in our Hebrew history, this is before David and Goliath. Right. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. All right. So we don't have that miracle story. Now, we got the miracle story of Pharaoh being wiped out in the sea and the Passover and all that stuff.
Good enough.
But we don't have the David and Goliath part that's now in the spiritual DNA of the people of Israel.
But the cornerstone to the whole story is the second verse in Numbers 13, where God said, this is what I want you to do. I'm giving this to you. It wouldn't matter if the people were 15 feet tall and 12 feet wide. Standing behind the nation of Israel was the God and creator of the universe. There was nothing that he could. Right.
They lost it.
Right. But Caleb and Joshua did not.
Now, let's talk about those two guys. They didn't. So they had faith. And they came back. And Caleb stood out especially because he tried hard. You read the text. He went to the people and he counseled with them and he petitioned them. He begged them. He said, no. We can. The God of Israel, God will do this for us. We just need to show up. He's the one who's got it. We're in his hands. And what's remarkable is he was unable to persuade them. And Joshua tried as well.
The sad thing is he had to wander in the desert as well for 40 years.
Yeah.
He didn't get to just go in by himself.
the judgment of God upon the disbelief is, okay, I heard what you had to say. You've all taken a vote. It's right back to, let's go back to Egypt. At least we had onions and leeks there. We're out of here. They're literally starting to, a rebellion is starting to happen. They're turning the carts around. They're going to go back. I don't know how they're going to get through the Red Sea. They hadn't thought that through very much. It's a pretty emotional moment.
And why am I hearing a Keith Green song right now?
There you go. There you go. We're back to Egypt.
So you want to go back to Egypt.
Yeah. And God says, no, I got a better idea. We're done with this. You're going to wander in the wilderness for 40 years. And here's why. Because everybody was over 20 years old. You had a chance here in this community to resist the evil, to not drink the poison, to not be influenced by the peer pressure and fear. And you choked. So here's what's going to happen. You're all going to die in the desert. I'm going to give you exactly what you said you were afraid was going to happen. We're going to die in this desert. So if that's all you think of me, then guess what? You're going to get what you asked for. Anybody more than 20 years of age is going to die in this desert, and it's going to be the next 40 years. You're going to be wandering around for 40 years. 11 days, you won't be back to this gate for 40 years. And it won't be you, it'll be your kids, except for two. Joshua and Caleb.
There's another lesson I think we need to really catch as we're moving through this. And I know we're going through this kind of quickly, but the Lord's first inclination was to strike them with plagues and kill them, the nation of Israel. Moses begged on their behalf for the Lord's forgiveness. And what's really interesting to me is the Lord said, I forgive. I do forgive based on your request. I will grant that, but there are still consequences. So we could be praying on behalf of people that we know in our family, extended family, friends, asking God for his mercy on someone else. God may choose to have mercy, but whatever they're involved in, there would still be consequences. That plays out in our lives today, in terms of our relationship with Christ and all that. I know we live in a different age, but there's still application of that even today.
Well, and one of the scariest parts about this passage is, isn't there a point at which everybody goes, hey, wait, actually, we will go in now? And God says,
too late.
Too late. Yeah. And it's,
But they go anyhow.
Yeah.
They go anyhow.
Oh, yes, they try. They try, and then he's not with them at that point. He is not
and Moses
empowering
says,
them.
Don't do this. I'm telling you, do not do this. I'm warning you. And they get up, they get over the hill, they get down to where the enemies can see them, and the enemies come and blow them to smithereens. Lots of people get whooped and killed. Mm-hmm. And it's like Moses just going, kind of told you. Kind of told you.
Obedience matters, doesn't it?
Yeah. Obedience is greater than sacrifice. And by the way, clue, don't mess with the living God. You got a decision to make here. And they made the wrong choice. It cost them 40 years. Now they're coming back to this door. They'll be knocking on this door again when we return from our break. And it'll be a very different story, which will bring us back to Caleb one more time.
All right. Well, this is fascinating, and we'll continue the conversation, as Dave said, with the team here today at the Public Square. Most of you, I'm sure, listen on radio, but I know a lot of you listen online as well. Maybe you can't hear the whole program on radio. You can catch the rest online at thepublicsquare.com. How about using that easy-to-access and free smartphone app found in your app store called the Public Square? We're opening our Bibles today to the Old Testament, of all places, on the Public Square, and looking at really the story of Caleb, isn't it? Caleb and Joshua, but primarily Caleb here, Dave.
Yeah, we're back to Kadesh Barnea. We're back 40 years. The crusty old disbelievers, unbelievers, they died in the wilderness because they had disqualified themselves from entering into a land of promise because they broke faith with the promise keeper. And so they weren't capable. It's sort of like there was so much Egypt in them, they couldn't get into the promised land. And so God had to recreate another generation of people who Egypt was only a memory. The wilderness was their reality. And depending upon God every single day for bread and meat and water and provision and hope, that group, the children of the disbelievers, came forward with a different reality. And now it's time to go into the promised land. And there's only two guys left from the spies, Caleb and Joshua. Now, if you want the Cliff's Notes version, you can go in the Old Testament to the book of Numbers, and you can read the 14th chapter. And then you can go to, just turn over a couple pages to the book of Joshua, the 14th chapter, and you'll get the Cliff Notes on all of this. All right, it's 2 small chapters to read, and it'll catch you up real quick. Numbers 14, Joshua 14. So then a great conversation happens. Caleb, who's clearly older than Joshua, Caleb comes to Joshua and says, hey, it's just like it's like all of a sudden I feel like I'm in Goodfellas or something. He says, now Joshua, of course, Moses has died, okay? Moses has died, and Joshua has been placed in charge by God. And that's the first chapter of the book of Joshua, fantastic chapter, where God says, hey, Moses is dead. Now, everybody knew Moses is dead, but God wanted Joshua to know for sure because they never recovered Moses' body to bury it. Okay? So Joshua is being told by God, the big guy's gone, no more resources from him. It's me and you now, kid. So you're going to lead, and I'm going to give you the same advice I gave Moses, because like I was with Moses, I will be with you. Do not be dismayed. Do not be discouraged. Do not be afraid. I am with you. I will never leave you. I will never forsake you. All right, and he gives him a beautiful, in the first 9 verses of Joshua chapter 1, amazing testimony on leadership, what it's supposed to look like. So Caleb comes knocking on the door. Josh, hey, Josh, we've got to talk. It's time. We're going in. Got it. You know, this is all going to work out. Remember what God said? Remember the deal? Okay, you and I are going to be able to go in. And so it's my turn now in the tribes, and it's time to allocate the land. So I'm going in, you remember, and I would like to have privilege to pick out my piece of land. Joshua's listening. And so what does Caleb tell him? What's he looking for? He says, you know, I heard like there's a big mountain. There's a big hill out there. Remember that? Remember we were out there? Remember that hill? Remember where those giants were? Yeah. I'm betting they're still there. Give me that land. That's the land I want. Oh, did we fail to mention his age at this point in the game?
85.
How many 85-year-olds do you know are ready for war to go out and actual fight in hand-to-hand? Yeah.
And he says, I not only want the big hill, I want the one the giants are on. At 85 years of age. Now, I have always been overwhelmed by that story. When I heard it again from a pastor recently at a church in Florida, as a Canadian pastor actually delivered the message, I was refreshed and convicted all again at the same time. This guy's 85 years old, and he's going to take on the giants. Now, here's my question. Do we have any evidence how that fight ended up?
Well, it must have been successful because he got the land of Hebron and he lived there for, his generations were blessed. His daughter married a designated person. His son-in-law became one of the first judges of Israel later. So there was longevity there. And so evidently it was successful.
Well, the scripture's clear. He drove out the giants.
Permanently.
And took that land. Yes, he did.
Yes, he did.
Did they run away because they saw this shredded 85-year-old guy, looked like he'd been pumping iron for 1,000 years, and they said, well, we can't take this guy, and they ran away.
Caleb ran after those giants. He went up that hill with he and his family, and they kicked them out. We don't know whether any survived. Obviously, there's a Goliath further down the road. Maybe he was related. I don't know. But Caleb took Hebron, the land. Caleb took that land.
It was consequential because God was the one who said, my servant Caleb has a different spirit and follows me wholeheartedly. It was cause-effect in terms of what Caleb was able to do to claim the promise that God had made.
Leaders lead.
Yes, they do.
Leaders lead.
Leaders lead. And it doesn't matter whether they're 40 or whether they're 80 or they're 85. Leaders lead. Caleb knew how old he was. He told Joshua, he said, I've been at this for a while. You too.
And it doesn't matter if they're in the minority or not.
No, it does not matter, does it? How many times have we heard God and you are a majority?
Well, leaders lead, and we also see when leaders lead and they do it with the Lord on their side or following the Lord's plan, not being the same as leaders attempting to lead for selfish ambition or for personal gain. And that isn't what this was. It was for others as well, for generations to come.
Well, and you sent around a fascinating piece, Dave, for us to read. It talks about Hebron, it being such a special place, just inherently. It says Abraham lived there. Abraham purchased it. Adam and Eve were buried there. This is Jewish thought. Traditional Jewish thought is that Adam and Eve were buried at this spot. And so all the patriarchs and matriarchs ended up being buried there. So this is a very special place in Jewish and then therefore Christian history.
And there is a huge monument structure there over that cave that Abraham purchased. In fact, I think that article mentions it was the first recorded point of history where someone bought property in that region right there. And it was Abraham buying it. Mm-hmm. And he bought it. And so Hebron is in fact, it's considered in Jewish tradition one of the four most sacred cities in Israel.
Oh, they say the best lambs were from there for sacrificing. That's pretty intense. It was David's capital city before Jerusalem.
Yep.
Yes, it was. And it wouldn't have been any of that had it not been for that 85-year-old guy who decided that if the Giants were going up there, that's where he was going. So kind of like, forgive the triteness of it, but it kind of like it wasn't the size of the fight. It was the size of the fight in the man, right? Mm-hmm. Well, how does that go, Jeff?
It's not the size of the dog, but it's the size of the fight in the dog. And that's what Caleb means in Hebrew. Caleb means dog. And so I'm of the opinion that was actually a nickname.
Got that dog in him.
That's right, because he was such a tough fighter. He would just hang on and wouldn't let go.
Come full circle, haven't we?
Yeah. As a Browns fan, I like that. Dogs. Yeah. They haven't beaten any Giants yet, though. But I have faith.
New York
that
Giants?
One day.
New York Giants?
Give it 40 years. Give it 40 years.
Yeah. That's
Maybe is this why he really named his son Caleb? Maybe is that what it is?
Hey, there you go.
Yeah. What's up, dog? Let's take a break. This is a great place to stop for just a moment because we've got a lot more to talk about as we think through all that this passage teaches us about living life today as citizens and as Americans in this country. So that's coming up on The Public Square. And again, you'll find us online at thepublicsquare.com.
We'll be right back for more on The Public Square. Spreading the light of liberty across the land. Now back to The Public Square.
Okay, the flannel graph is still up. We've still got Joshua and Caleb on the flannel, little cutout figures there. We've been learning lessons from Caleb here today, Dave. So let's talk about how we apply what we've learned.
Yeah, I think there's a big application. My wife and I came home from church thinking about this a lot. We spent a lot of time studying it. We talked about it in staff. We reviewed some scriptures and some more documents and refreshed ourselves on Hebrew history. It just astounds me that Caleb, there was no give up in Caleb. There was no surrender. There was no retirement. All right, he paid the dues he didn't have to pay in the wilderness for 40 years. He was out of commission. He was disenfranchised from what had been rightly given to him by God because of other people's disbelief. And he endured it. He sucked it up. He kept his faith in God. He got back to that portal of the promised land. And this time when he went through, he said, let me finish this. Let me finish this so that someday, thousands of years later, people will look at this story and say, not only did Caleb make it in, but he went after the giants that were the excuse for an entire nation to fall.
Didn't take the easy path, did he?
He didn't take the easy path. And the thing is that this is an elevated territory. In other words, this was one of those mountains. We're talking about a mountainous area. We're talking about the size of the task was, to the human eye, elevated in geography and elevated in regards to the strength, the size, the scope, the spiritual power of the enemy. The bigger the fight, the more Caleb wanted to go up that hill.
Think about how tough it would have been for him to see all his comrades and countrymen around him die in the wilderness.
Yeah.
That in and of itself, just from a psychological and human perspective, that might have been one of the hardest things he would have to do. I mean, the scripture doesn't really talk about that specifically, but in our day, just sometimes we see people fall. We see people leave the faith that we thought they professed. We see people stumble. We see people have, differing political opinions and beliefs that we think, oh my goodness, I can't believe this person even thinks that. So I think keeping our eyes on God through the midst of watching people fall around us is another lesson we can learn from this.
I think there's also, when you think about leaders, we talked previously in this broadcast about different types of leaders from a policy, elected maybe positions. There's business leaders. There's leaders within the home. The parents are supposed to be leading the children in their care to faith in Christ as best they can. There's ways to demonstrate leadership in terms of following your faith in God's promises and the truth of God's word. But on the flip side, we also have situations where we face Goliaths, where we face the giants, whether it's a giant in terms of a policy, in terms of a person, where we feel like the grasshoppers. How can we possibly have an impact on X, Y, or Z? I have, over the last probably more than 35 years, there have been plenty. I could spend the entire broadcast telling stories of where I felt like a grasshopper facing a giant, but trusted that God was going to accomplish his sovereign purpose in the issue that was in front of me. And it's not that I'm this, big heroic person learning all of these lessons. It is a part of life's experience to allow ourselves to be taught by God how he can accomplish his purpose when we simply are obedient and submissive to his will.
There's so many fascinating points in this Flannel Graph Sunday School discussion that are applications. Now, there's some things that we could get wrong. The idea is this isn't just about being courageous. This just isn't about spitting into the wind. This is the reality that if God gives you a point of reference, he gives you a vision, he gives you a commandment, if you're walking in the direction of what God has revealed himself in the ancient scriptures, if you're talking about the Judeo-Christian revelation, the creator of all that we know and all that we don't know, when he is with you and you're walking with him, your courage is not in your strength. The mountain didn't get smaller. The giants didn't get shorter. Your courage comes from his presence being with you. Mm-hmm. If he says, come on, we're going, and you're following, where are your eyes? Your eyes are on him. Where are our eyes? Our eyes are on his strength. He's the leader. We're the follower. And that was the way Joshua and Caleb approached this. And so when they went back in the second time, they were victorious. But interestingly enough, the scripture tells us that they didn't get it all in one day. The Lord told them, when you get in, and he had a new generation, a generation that was not wounded so mortally by Egypt that they could believe, and they had watched their parents pass away because of disbelief. These folks weren't about to make the same mistake twice. They were more than ready to get out of the sand. They wanted into the promised land. But the Lord said to them, you're going to get it little by little. You're going to go in and you're going to win, but I'm not going to give it to you easy. I'm not going to give it to you in a day. Not going to give it to you in a month because you couldn't handle it. It's going to take time to clean this mess up, and it's going to take time for righteousness to displace darkness. So you're going to have to stay at it. Now, the history of Israel shows this is true. And one of the reasons that I want to stop for just a second is there are people who are highly skeptical of the Old Testament. They think it's just all a bunch of fairy tales. And they would pretty quickly start to categorize this as a fairy tale. Yeah, 85-year-old guy goes up the mountain and kills the giants. Right. Jack and the Beanstalk. Okay, I get it. But wait a second. Why do you think the city of Hebron's there if Caleb didn't win it?
Yeah, there's no Chronicles of Narnia or Tolkien mythological figures in the Old Testament. You don't see the heroes of the Old Testament fighting these creatures and in some kind of mythological land. These are real time and space places with real names that you can go and see today. And the ancient peoples that they fought are confirmed by archaeology and other ancient records. It's nothing fanciful, actually.
Well, that brings us to the next attack that people have. They say, well, the Jews were involved in an ethnic cleansing or a genocide against these people, and they were commanded by God. That doesn't sound like a very nice thing for God to tell them to do. This is making the rounds on the YouTube space right now. So how would you all respond to that?
I would respond in two ways. Number one, they should read a very good book by Paul Copan, Copan. And he's a Hebrew scholar, and it's entitled, Is the God of the Old Testament a Moral Monster? And he addresses that issue. And he makes a very good case, based on the original language, that there are many places in the Old Testament where they did use some hyperbole, I think they did, in which they said, okay, go and wipe everybody out. Well, yeah, and it says, and they wiped everybody out, except that a few years later, those same people, the same tribe is still there in the land. So it would be like saying the Pittsburgh Steelers annihilated the Cleveland Browns.
We had to use that.
Yes, I know. We did. Did they literally annihilate the Cleveland Browns? No, they did not.
And it wasn't intended to be understood as such. Yeah.
Exactly. So did they go in there and they removed those people as a threat? Yes, they did. And only those people. There was a sunset clause there. They didn't go and do that to the Babylonians or the Egyptians.
Now, there's another piece of this action as well in regards to the moral agency question. But before we get there, I want to just drop one more time back to the evidence of history in archaeology and the reality that, I can remember in theological seminary in the early years, people actually not only questioned whether or not there was any writing during the time of Moses, so that these records couldn't have been accurate, they even questioned whether there was a Moses. Well, I've got a question. How could you even remotely have the nation of Israel as we see it today if there hadn't have been a Moses? Just go walk around a while and see what you see. You can be the most pagan person living in Israel today. You can be a citizen of the nation of Israel and have no religious faith and know just from standing around that it's not like there was no Moses. Are you out of your mind? Look at all the museums. All right? They didn't make this stuff up. This wasn't done in a corner.
If you are leaving the conversation at this point, please go online and hear the rest, because there are more practical lessons ahead here on the Public Square as you stay with us. Here we go. We've got maybe about 10 minutes to wrap up these lessons from the story of Caleb in the Old Testament, Dave.
Well, here's where it lands for us today on the Public Square. These sorts of questions in the Old Testament and the moving of nations and covenant peoples and all of these things have been the subject of study from the founders of our country from the very beginning. They paid attention to these stories. They paid attention to these accounts. They paid attention to the creation of the Hebrew Republic, to the Ten Commandments, to so many things. Now, the size of the mountain. Right now, we are in a period of political change in our country, and nobody knows how long it will last, how deep it will run, how valid it will ultimately be. What we are discovering in the process is there is a lot wrong in our government. And if you'll forgive me, this is probably not wise to say, so I ask for your forgiveness. But if you've been listening to the Public Square since 1989, nothing that you're hearing in the news today comes as a surprise to you. Because we've been talking about this since 1980. And we're not alone. There are scores of organizations and leaders and public officials who have been trying to alert the American people that our government is being deeply corrupted, if for no other reason than the size of the budgets and the amount of money that's being passed around. There's something very dangerous here. We're way past the guardrails. Suddenly, people are paying attention. Now, it's kind of refreshing. You know, when you've been out there banging the drum for 45 years and suddenly somebody goes, wait, I think I hear that. Okay. And again, this is for everyone that's been doing this. We're not alone. Many of the people listening to this broadcast are doing exactly the same thing. But here's the challenge. There's giants in this. The mountains that we're now going to have to move are big. This is not something that's going to be solved in 4 days, 4 months, 4 years. This is going to require running a lot of gigantic-sized illusions out of the imaginations of our country. And my question is, do we have the faith to be in this struggle for the long haul? Do we have the faith to say, forget who the politicians are, forget who the political parties are, right is right, wrong is wrong, and being $38 trillion in debt is wrong. I don't care who's getting the kickback, who's getting the benefits. We've got to start to put this, we're so far past the starting time, unless God miraculously gives us more time, we're cooked. Maybe, just maybe he'll move these mountains. Maybe he'll drive these giants out if we follow him. Do we have the courage of Caleb? Because it may take 40 more years.
And I think that's the thing we need to lock in on is we can't put a time frame on what is. It may be 40 years, it may be 80 years. In this world we live in today that seems like an instant gratification society, everything's at our fingertips, right? I mean, can you imagine back in the day when we're reading this, sending the scouts out, sending people out and waiting for someone to come back? It wasn't a text message that they got to find out the answers or the results. It wasn't a FaceTime call to be like, look what I found. Or look what's out here. It was so the fact of the patience then, we're going to need patience today, even though in our modern day America or modern day world, we're used to having everything we want at our fingertips. The other thing I think, and again, this comes out from a parental perspective, we're commanded to raise our kids in a certain way, but we're not commanded to wrap them in bubble wrap, to keep them from being prepared to be leaders in the future. I see so many people, instead of teaching their children how to navigate potholes, and I'm not the perfect parent, I'll be the first to admit that, but instead of teaching kids how to navigate potholes, we try and smooth every road that they're going to go on. It doesn't work that way. To raise leaders of the next generation, we have to do a better job of preparing them to understand what reality looks like. And it's not always the fairy tale. So how do we respond and react to the adversity that's put before us and live in a biblical manner while doing so?
I think in part we have to invite them into our adversity. We have to allow them to see things that we struggle with and teach them how the Lord is guiding us through, whether it's financial problems, whether it's something even more tangible than finances, illnesses, things of that nature. Don't shield the kids. Allow them to be a part of the whole teaching process that the Lord is dealing with us as the adults. But when we talk about the political spectrum and what's happening in real time right in front of us, I think we have to keep in mind that it's not us that are going to slay the Goliaths. We are going to be picking those leaders, like God told Moses to pick one person from each tribe to go and do the reconnaissance works and report back. We elect people to be in Congress. In the budget season, they are doing the grunt work of going through and putting together these packages that would reduce our debt, change the deficit, and move us in the direction that's more positive. Most people don't realize that, for monies that have been allocated, you can introduce a measure in Congress to have it be reexamined or, sort of a clawback, not a clawback, a redesignation of what those monies were used for. That's a separate piece of legislation. So we need congressional leaders. And for someone, to me, the person who says, I'm not going to vote in an election cycle is like the people who came back, the 10 that came back in Caleb's world and said, it's too big, we can't handle it, I don't want to mess with it. We just can't do that.
Well, it's interesting, Melanie, because if you really think about it, what choice did they have coming back saying it's too hard? Well, guess what? Dying in a wilderness kind of sucks too.
Right.
I mean, there's not a lot of options here.
Right.
Okay. And so the point being is, I think we have to ask ourselves, what are the giants that we're afraid of? When do we become grasshoppers in our own eyes? But see, it doesn't matter whether you think you're a grasshopper. God still made the grasshoppers.
Right.
And if he's the one who's with us, we can leap over anything. Yeah. If he's the one who's with us, we can take any mountain if we don't give up.
These same folks had just seen him bring Egypt to its knees using locusts. So he can use grasshoppers too.
And Melanie, talk about Congress. Congress is such a mess that it's going to take us 20 years to fix it, most likely. So if you think this thing's going to be over in 2 years or 4 years, no, we have to have all new people who see life from a very different perspective, of a constitutional perspective and worldview. And that takes time to get there. I want to know, where are the 85-year-olds right now that have said, fine, I'm only 85. Every day I got left till I'm gone out of here. I want a new Congress. I want my country fixed, and I'll fight long enough to however long it takes. Jeff, go ahead. Your thought.
I was just thinking, how many times in my life have I heard people who are so-called political experts say it's all over, there's no hope. I remember being at a rally one time. This was in 2009. Lots of people were with me, and it seemed like George Soros had checkmated the entire United States. He had the Congress that he wanted. He had the president that he paid for or that he wanted. We were at that time $13 trillion in debt. I remember those halcyon, carefree days of $13 trillion. And we were bogged down in Iraq and in Afghanistan. Everything was bad. And people were just saying, all hope is lost. And I said, are you serious? Here we are, how many years later? All hope is not lost, and George Soros and company are not invincible, are they?
Okay, well, you've heard our application of what we've talked about here today. Maybe you have some you'd like to share with us, of course. You're always welcome to reach us through our website, thepublicsquare.com. You can find out how to reach us through the website, and we'd love to get your feedback as well. So make sure you do that, and we'll be very grateful for it. Thank you, team. Great conversation today. Great topic. Thank you so much, and we'll see everybody next time on The Public Square.
The Public Square is a broadcast service of the American Policy Roundtable.